The night was cold and quiet when the sky changed forever. It was 3 in the morning when every screen on Earth flickered at the same time. Television sets in living rooms turned on by themselves. Phones lit up in the darkness. Computer monitors in offices displayed the same image. An alien face appeared before the human race for the first time in history. Admiral Daniel Hayes was standing in the command center of the orbital station called Sentinel Prime when the transmission arrived. He had been reviewing patrol reports with his executive officer, Commander Laura, when the main screen went dark and then showed something that made his blood run cold. The face on the screen was covered in small scales. The eyes were black and empty like the void of space itself. The creature had no lips, just a thin line that moved when it spoke. The voice came through the speakers in a tone that was flat and without any emotion. The universal translator converted the alien language into English, but the words carried a weight that needed no translation. Species designation human. You have been assessed. Your world has been selected for harvesting. You have resisted our preliminary scouts. This is your final warning. Surrender your population for processing or face complete extinction. You have 72 hours to comply. The screen went black again. Commander turned to look at Admiral Hayes. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She had served with Hayes for 12 years and had never seen him look the way he looked now. It was not fear in his eyes. It was something else entirely. It was the look of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Around the world, chaos erupted in the streets. People ran from their homes screaming. Governments issued emergency broadcasts telling citizens to remain calm. Religious leaders gathered their followers to pray. Some people wept and some people fought. The news channels showed footage of riots in major cities and of families hugging each other in fear. The world had 72 hours to live and everyone knew it. But in a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, something different was happening. General Mitchell stood at the head of a long table surrounded by the most powerful military leaders on Earth. The room was silent except for the hum of computers and the distant rumble of ventilation systems. On the wall behind Mitchell was a map of the solar system with hundreds of small dots marking positions that most people on Earth did not know existed. "They think we are cattle," Mitchell said quietly. His voice was calm and steady. "They have given us 72 hours because they believe we will spend that time begging for mercy. They believe we will offer them anything they want if they spare our lives. They are wrong." Dr. Cole stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the room. She was the head of the United Earth Defense Initiative, a program so secret that fewer than 1,000 people knew it existed. She had spent the last 15 years of her life preparing for this exact moment. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the holographic display in the center of the table. "In 2031, we captured one of their scout vessels," she said. "The crew was dead, but the ship was intact. We have spent 15 years studying their technology. We have learned how their weapons work. We have learned how their shields function. We have learned their weaknesses, and we have built something they do not expect." The holographic display showed images of ships, hundreds of ships hidden in secret shipyards across the solar system. They were sleek and powerful, designed using a combination of human engineering and stolen alien technology. 200 warships waited in the darkness of space, armed with weapons that had never seen used against them. Admiral Hayes received the briefing via secure channel aboard Sentinel Prime. As he watched the images of the secret fleet, he felt something stir in his chest. It was hope. For 15 years, the governments of Earth had worked together in secret to prepare for this day. They had known the aliens would return. They had known the scouts were only the beginning, and they had decided that humanity would not go quietly into the night. Hayes looked at the faces of his crew around the command center. They were young men and women who had joined the service to protect their planet. Lieutenant Price was at the communications station. He was only 24 years old with a wife and a newborn daughter back on Earth. Ensign Maria Santos was at the tactical station. She had grown up in a small village in Brazil and had dreamed of the stars since she was a child. These people were not soldiers who had signed up for glory. They were ordinary humans who had chosen to stand between their world and the darkness. Hayes thought about his own daughter. She was 12 years old and lived with her mother in a small town in Oregon. He had not seen her in 3 months because of his duties on the station. He wondered if he would ever see her again. He wondered what kind of world she would grow up in if they failed. "Sir," Lieutenant Price said, breaking the silence, "Command is asking if we want to send a response to the alien transmission." Hayes turned to look at the young officer. Then he looked at Commander. She gave him a small nod. "Yes," Hayes said, "open a channel." The communications array hummed to life. Somewhere out there beyond the orbit of Mars, a fleet of alien warships was waiting for humanity to surrender. They were waiting for tears and pleas and desperate bargaining. They were waiting for prey to act like prey. "This is Admiral Daniel Hayes of the United Earth Defense Force," he said into the microphone. His voice was steady and clear. "We have received your ultimatum. We decline your offer. Humanity will not surrender. We will not submit to harvesting. We will not allow our children to be taken. In 72 hours, we will not be waiting for you. We will be coming for you. This is our response. This is our answer. And this is your only warning." He cut the transmission and turned to face his crew. "Begin preparations," he said. "We have work to do." Commander was already moving toward her station. Around the command center, officers sprang into action. Across the solar system, 200 warships began powering up their engines. In bunkers on Earth, soldiers said goodbye to their families. In laboratories, scientists made final adjustments to weapons that would change the course of history. They had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. They did not understand that they had made the worst mistake of their 3,000-year empire. They had given humanity time to prepare. They had given humanity time to gather its strength. And they had given humanity something even more dangerous. They had given humanity a reason to fight. The fleet waited in the cold darkness near Mars. 1,000 warships hung in perfect formation like a wall of death stretching across the stars. They had traveled across the galaxy to harvest another primitive species. They had done this countless times before. For 3,000 years, the Empire had consumed world after world. No species had ever stopped them. No species had ever truly fought back. High Sovereign stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched the tactical display with mild interest. He was old by standards, having lived for nearly 800 years. He had personally overseen the harvesting of more than 200 worlds. He had seen species beg for mercy. He had seen them offer their own children in exchange for survival. He had seen them turn on each other in desperate attempts to save themselves. But he had never seen a species actually threaten the fleet. "Play the human response again," he said to his communications officer. The recording filled the bridge. The voice of Admiral Hayes echoed through the speakers, listened to the words, and then made a sound that was the equivalent of laughter. "They threaten us," he said to his subordinates. "How delightful! It has been centuries since prey showed such spirit. Perhaps this harvest will be more entertaining than I expected." His officers laughed with him. They had no doubt about the outcome. The humans had primitive technology. The humans had a small fleet of obsolete vessels. The humans were prey, and prey always fell to thee in the end. But did not know what was happening on the other side of the solar system. He did not know about the shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt. He did not know about the weapons laboratories buried beneath the mountains of Earth. He did not know that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they captured that first scout ship 15 years ago. Captain Torres stood on the bridge of his ship and looked at the faces of his crew. The vessel was called the Midnight Sun, and it was one of the most advanced stealth destroyers ever built by human hands. 83 men and women served under his command. They had trained together for years. They had run countless simulations. They had studied every piece of information that humanity had gathered about them, and now they were about to put everything they had learned to the test. "I know you are afraid," Tor said to his crew over the intercom. "I'm afraid too, but I want you to remember something. Our ancestors hunted mammoths with nothing but sharpened sticks and courage. Our grandparents fought wars against terrible enemies and refused to surrender. Our parents built the ships that took us to the stars. We come from a species that has never stopped fighting for survival. Today we carry on that tradition. Today we show what humanity is made of." The crew responded with cheers that echoed through the corridors of the ship. Tors felt pride swelling in his chest. These were good people. These were brave people. They deserved to win. Admiral Hayes commanded the fleet from the bridge of the battleship Defiance. It was the largest ship humanity had ever built, carrying a crew of 2,000 and armed with weapons that could crack a moon in half. Commander stood at his side, managing the tactical display and coordinating with the other ships in the fleet. "All vessels report ready," she said. 200 ships standing by for your orders, sir." Hayes nodded slowly. He looked at the display showing the position of the fleet near Mars. 1,000 enemy ships against 200 human vessels. The odds were terrible, but Hayes had studied the enemy. He knew their tactics, he knew their weaknesses, and he knew something that they did not understand. Numbers were not everything in war. On Earth, Dr. Cole monitored the situation from the command bunker. Chief Engineer stood beside her, watching the data streams flowing across multiple screens, had personally designed the Hellfire missiles that armed the human fleet. These weapons could punch through shields in ways the enemy had never experienced. He had spent 10 years perfecting the technology. Now he would find out if his work had been good enough. "The fleet is moving," Cole said quietly. "God help them all." The human ships emerged from behind Earth's moon in perfect formation. They accelerated toward Mars at speeds that surprised even their own crews. The new engines that had designed pushed the vessels faster than any human ship had ever traveled before. In the darkness of space, 200 points of light raced toward a confrontation that would decide the fate of humanity. They detected the approaching fleet immediately. Sensor officers reported the readings to their commanders, but the data did not make sense. The human ships were moving too fast. Their energy signatures were too powerful. Something was wrong. High Sovereign studied the sensor data with growing confusion. His tactical officers assured him that the readings must be errors. No prey species had ever matched technology. It was simply impossible. The humans must have found some way to fool the sensors. There was no other explanation. "Prepare the fleet for engagement," ordered. "We will crush these creatures and proceed with the harvest as planned." 1,000 warships moved into attack formation. They spread out across the void like a net designed to catch fish. Their weapons charged with energy that could burn through planetary crusts. Their commanders laughed at the audacity of 200 human vessels challenging their might. Lieutenant Commander Reeves led a squadron of 30 fighter craft. These small ships were designed to dart between larger vessels, targeting weak points and drawing fire away from the capital ships. Reeves was 31 years old and had been flying since she was 16. She was the best pilot in the fleet. Everyone knew it. "Stay close to me," she told her pilots over the radio. "Watch each other's backs. We fight together and we survive together. No heroics, no stupid risks, just good flying and teamwork." Her pilots acknowledged the orders. They were young men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous job in the fleet. They knew the odds. They knew many of them would not survive the coming battle. But they flew toward the enemy anyway because that was what humans did when their home was threatened. Admiral Hayes watched the distance between the fleets shrink on the tactical display. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Everything he had learned, everything he had trained for, came down to the next few hours. "All ships," he said into the fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Hayes. We are about to engage the enemy. Remember what we are fighting for. Remember the people back home who are counting on us. Remember that we are not prey. We have never been prey. We are the wolves of Earth, and today the wolves are hungry." The two fleets closed the distance between them. The darkness of space seemed to hold its breath. And then, in a flash of light and fire that could be seen from Earth, the Battle of the Red Line began. The first shots of the battle lit up the darkness like 1,000 suns being born at once. They opened fire with their standard tactics, the same tactics they had used for 3,000 years against countless species. Plasma lances streaked across the void, carrying enough energy to burn through mountains. Missile swarms launched from 100 ships at once. The alien commanders expected the human shields to collapse in seconds. They expected the human ships to break apart like toys crushed by a giant hand. But something unexpected happened. The human shields held. Admiral Hayes watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the enemy fire splashed harmlessly against the modified shield generators. Chief Engineer had spent years studying the captured technology. He had found the frequencies that the alien weapons used. He had designed shields that could resist those frequencies. The enemy was firing with everything they had, and humanity was still standing. "Return fire," Hayes ordered. "All ships weapons free." The human fleet answered with a roar of destruction that shook the formation to its core. Hellfire missiles streaked toward enemy vessels, their warheads designed to pass through alien shields like a hot knife through butter. Plasma cannons modified with human targeting systems struck with precision that they had never seen from a prey species. Captain Torres aboard the Midnight Sun was the first to score a confirmed kill. His stealth destroyer had slipped behind the enemy lines without being detected. When he was less than 500 meters from the hull of a dreadnought. His weapons officer launched a spread of Hellfire missiles at point-blank range. The missiles punched through the dreadnought's shields and detonated inside the ship. For a moment, the massive vessel seemed to shudder like a wounded animal. Then it broke apart in a blossom of fire and debris that scattered across 1,000 kilometers of space. "Confirmed kill," Torres reported over the fleet channel. "The weapons work. I repeat, the weapons work." Cheers erupted across the human fleet. For the first time in history, a human ship had destroyed a warship in combat. It was proof that the enemy could be hurt. It was proof that the enemy could be killed. High Sovereign watched the destruction of his dreadnought with disbelief written across his face. In 800 years, he had never seen a prey species destroy a capital ship. It was impossible. It could not be happening. And yet the debris of his vessel was spreading across the void, carrying the bodies of 3,000 crew members. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "These creatures were assessed as primitive. Our scouts reported that they had no advanced weapons." His tactical officer had no answer. The data on their screens showed something that contradicted everything they believed about the universe. The humans were not just fighting back. They were winning. Lieutenant Commander Reeves led her fighter squadron into the heart of the formation. Her small craft darted between the massive enemy vessels, moving too fast for their weapons to track. She targeted engine systems and weapon batteries, crippling ships so the larger human vessels could finish them off. "Stay tight, stay fast," she ordered her pilots. "They cannot hit what they cannot catch. Keep moving and keep firing." Her squadron worked as a single unit, each pilot protecting the others while striking at the enemy. They had trained for years for this moment. They knew each other's movements without needing to speak. When one pilot was in danger, another was there to draw fire away. When one pilot found an opening, others were ready to exploit it. They tried to adapt their tactics, but they did not know how. For 3,000 years, they had fought against species that ran away or surrendered. They had no experience fighting an enemy that attacked with coordination and ferocity. Their formations began to break apart as panic spread through their ranks. Commander managed the battle from her station on the Defiance, tracking the positions of every friendly and enemy ship. She directed reinforcements to weak points in the human line. She coordinated attacks on high-value targets. Her mind processed information faster than any computer, finding patterns and opportunities that others missed. "Admiral," she said, "the enemy is pulling back their left flank. If we push now, we can split their formation in half." Hayes studied the tactical display and saw what she saw. It was a risk. Pushing forward would expose their own ships to fire from multiple directions, but the potential reward was worth the danger. "All ships on the right wing advance," he ordered. "Target the gap in their formation. Do not let them regroup." The human fleet surged forward like a spear thrust into the heart of the enemy. Ships burned and died as the human weapons tore through them. The gap in the alien formation widened as more ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. High Sovereign watched his fleet falling apart and made a decision that no commander had made in 3,000 years. He ordered a retreat. "All ships fall back to Mars orbit," he commanded. "We need to regroup and reassess the situation." The fleet began to withdraw, leaving behind the burning wreckage of 200 destroyed ships. The human fleet pursued for a time but then held back on Admiral Hayes' orders. They had won the first battle, but they had not won the war. On the Defiance, the crew was celebrating. Officers were shaking hands and embracing. Some were weeping with relief. They had faced the monsters from the stars and they had survived. More than survived. They had won. But Admiral Hayes did not celebrate. He stood at the viewport looking out at the debris field that marked the site of the battle. Somewhere in that wreckage were human ships and human crews. Not every vessel had survived the engagement. The cost of victory had been paid in blood. Commander joined him at the viewport. Her face was tired, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. "We did it, sir," she said quietly. "We actually did it." Hayes nodded slowly. "We won a battle, but we'll call for reinforcements. More ships will come. This was just the beginning." Looked out at the stars that had become a battlefield. She knew Hayes was right. They would not accept this defeat. They would return with a larger force. They would try to crush humanity with overwhelming numbers. "Then we will be ready for them," she said. "We did not come this far to lose. Whatever they send, we will face it together." Hayes placed his hand on her shoulder. In that moment, standing in the glow of the debris field that marked humanity's first victory against an alien empire, he felt something that he had not felt in a long time. He felt like they might actually survive. 3 weeks passed after the Battle of the Red Line. 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of preparation. 3 weeks of knowing that the enemy would return with a force large enough to darken the sky. When the reinforcements arrived, they came in numbers that made the First Fleet look like a scouting party. 5,000 warships emerged from hyperspace in a wall of metal and death that stretched from one horizon to another. The largest fleet ever assembled by the Empire hung in space near Jupiter, and every sensor on Earth detected their arrival. Admiral Hayes received the report aboard a temporary command station on the Moon. The Defiance was still undergoing repairs from the first battle, and he had been coordinating the defense preparations from the lunar surface. When he saw the numbers on the display, his stomach turned cold. 5,000 ships, Commander said quietly. She stood beside him, her face pale in the blue light of the monitors. "We have 312 vessels, including the new construction." 300 against 5,000. It was a ratio that seemed impossible to overcome. Even with their advanced weapons and superior tactics, the human fleet was facing an enemy that could simply overwhelm them with numbers. For every ship they destroyed, 15 more would take its place. On Earth, people watched the news with fear in their eyes. The footage of the incoming fleet played on every screen. Families gathered together in their homes, holding each other close. Children who did not understand what was happening could feel the tension in the air. Religious services filled to capacity as people sought comfort in faith. Many believed this was the end of humanity. But in the bunkers beneath the mountains and in the shipyards orbiting the planet, people were still working. They had not given up. They had not surrendered. They were still fighting. Dr. Cole had not slept in 3 days. She stood in her laboratory surrounded by engineers and scientists who looked just as exhausted as she felt. On the table before her was a device that could change the course of the battle. They called it the Genesis device. It was a weapon of last resort, capable of releasing energy that could destroy an entire enemy formation in a single blast. "Is it ready?" General Mitchell asked. He had come to the laboratory in person, understanding the importance of what they were attempting. Cole nodded slowly. "It is ready, but I need you to understand what this weapon does. The energy release will be catastrophic. Any ship caught in the blast radius, friend or enemy, will be destroyed. We have one chance to use it. We cannot miss." Had been working around the clock to produce more Hellfire missiles and to upgrade the shields on as many ships as possible. His teams had managed miracles of engineering in the 3 weeks since the first battle. But even miracles had limits. They simply did not have enough time or resources to match the enemy's numbers. "We have to be smart about this," Hayes said during the final strategy meeting. "We cannot beat them with force alone. We need to use everything we have learned about them. We need to fight the battle they do not expect." Intelligence gathered from the destroyed ships had revealed crucial information about the enemy. Their empire was vast but brittle. They had never faced true resistance because they always chose targets that could not fight back. Their tactics were designed for slaughter, not for war. They did not know how to adapt when prey became predator. The second battle began at dawn on December 21st, the winter solstice and the longest night of the year. The human fleet moved to intercept the enemy at the orbit of the moon, using Earth's satellite as a defensive anchor. Every ship, every pilot, every crew member knew that this was the moment that would decide the fate of their species. High Sovereign commanded the fleet from his new flagship. He had been humiliated by the defeat at the Red Line. His superiors had sent him reinforcements, but also a message. Failure would not be tolerated again. He intended to crush the humans so completely that no species would ever dare to resist the Empire again. "Advance on all fronts," he ordered. "Leave nothing alive." The fighting began in earnest as the two fleets collided. The void of space became a storm of fire and death. Ships on both sides burned and died as weapons tore through shields and hulls. The human fleet fought with desperate courage, knowing that retreat was not an option. Lieutenant Commander Reeves led her squadron into the thickest part of the battle. Her pilots followed her through a maze of enemy ships, striking at targets and evading return fire with movements that seemed almost impossible. But the enemy numbers were overwhelming. One by one, her pilots began to fall. "Stay with me," she called over the radio as another fighter disappeared in a ball of flame. "Do not give up, keep fighting." She lost half her squadron in the first hour. The faces of friends she had trained with for years flashed through her mind as their ships were destroyed. But she kept flying. She kept fighting. That was all she could do. Captain Torres took the Midnight Sun deep into enemy lines, hunting for high-value targets. His stealth systems allowed him to move unseen among the massive warships, striking and then disappearing before they could respond. He destroyed 3 enemy vessels before his luck ran out. A cruiser detected the Midnight Sun and opened fire before Torres could cloak. The first salvo struck the destroyer's engine section, crippling the vessel and killing 30 crew members instantly. Fire spread through the corridors as systems failed across the ship. "All hands abandon ship," Torres ordered. His voice was calm even as smoke filled the bridge. "Get to the escape pods, that is an order." He stayed at his post, coordinating the evacuation until he was certain that everyone who could escape had escaped. Then he made his way to the last pod and launched into the chaos of the battle around him. The turning point came 4 hours into the engagement. The human fleet was battered and bleeding. They had lost nearly 100 ships and were being pushed back toward Earth. High Sovereign sensed victory and ordered his forces to close in for the kill. That was when Dr. Cole gave the order to launch the Genesis device. A single missile streaked from Earth's surface, climbing through the atmosphere and accelerating into space. It was small and insignificant compared to the massive warships filling the void. They did not notice it until it was too late. The device detonated in the center of the enemy formation. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, space itself seemed to twist and scream. A wave of energy expanded outward at the speed of light, vaporizing everything in its path. When the light faded, 800 warships were gone. Where they had been, there was only empty space and scattered atoms. The surviving ships froze in shock. In 3,000 years, they had never experienced anything like this. Their formations broke apart as panic spread through their ranks. Commanders screamed contradictory orders. Crews abandoned their stations. Admiral Hayes saw the opening and seized it. All ships advance, press the attack, do not let them recover. The human fleet surged forward with renewed energy. The leaderless and terrified could not organize an effective defense. Ship after ship fell to human weapons. The tide of the battle had turned completely. High Sovereign watched his fleet disintegrate around him. For the first time in 800 years, he felt something he had never experienced before. He felt fear. He ordered his remaining ships to retreat, and the fleet fled from the solar system like frightened animals running from a fire. On the moon, Admiral Hayes watched the enemy disappear into hyperspace. Around him, his staff was celebrating. They had won against impossible odds. They had saved humanity from extinction. But Hayes knew that the cost had been terrible. More than 100 human ships had been destroyed. Thousands of crew members were dead. The debris of the battle would drift through space for centuries, a memorial to those who had given everything for their species. Commander joined him at the observation window. Her uniform was stained with smoke and her face was marked with exhaustion. But there was something in her eyes that had not been there before. It was pride. "They will remember this day," she said quietly. "They will remember the long night and how humanity refused to die." Hayes nodded slowly. Outside the window, the stars shone cold and bright. The enemy was gone, but he knew they would not forget what had happened here. The galaxy was watching, and humanity had just announced its presence in a way that could never be ignored. The war lasted another 18 months after the long night, but the outcome had been decided in the fire and fury of that single battle. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years because no species had ever truly challenged them. Now they faced something they had never encountered before. They faced a species that would not stop fighting. Admiral Hayes led the expeditionary fleet beyond the solar system, chasing the retreating enemy to their forward bases. The campaign was long and brutal. Humanity lost ships and crews in battles that raged across light years of space. But they did not stop. They did not surrender. They pushed forward with a determination that terrified their enemies. Captain Torres recovered from his injuries aboard a medical station orbiting Earth. His ship was gone, but his reputation had grown into legend. When he was cleared for duty, command gave him a new vessel. It was a heavy cruiser named the Iron Will, and it became one of the most feared ships in the human fleet. Torres led his crew into battle after battle, and they learned to run when they detected his signature on their sensors. Lieutenant Commander Reeves was promoted to captain after the long night. She took command of the rebuilt fighter wing and trained a new generation of pilots. Her students called her the Ice Queen because of her calm demeanor under fire, but those who flew with her knew the truth. She cared deeply about every pilot under her command. She memorized their names and their faces. She made sure they came home whenever possible. The empire began to crumble from within. For 3,000 years, they had maintained their power through fear. The species they had conquered were kept in line by the belief that resistance was impossible. But humanity had proven that resistance was not only possible but could succeed. The example spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On 100 worlds, enslaved species rose up against their masters. Rebellions erupted in places that had been silent for centuries. The empire that had seemed invincible was suddenly fighting for survival on 1,000 fronts. They did not have enough ships or soldiers to maintain control. Their systems of oppression collapsed under the weight of hope. Commander received her own promotion during the second year of the war. She became admiral and took command of humanity's peacekeeping fleet. Her mission was to support the rebellions and protect the newly freed worlds from counterattacks. She performed her duties with the same precision and dedication that had made her invaluable during the early battles. Dr. Cole stepped back from military work after the war entered its final phase. She had given everything she had to the defense of Earth, and the weight of her decisions haunted her dreams. The Genesis device had saved humanity, but it had also killed hundreds of thousands in an instant. She spent her remaining years teaching at a university on Earth, helping young scientists understand the responsibility that came with great power. Continued developing new technologies, but his focus shifted from weapons to reconstruction. The solar system had been damaged by the battles, and countless families had lost loved ones. Devoted himself to building stations and habitats that would help humanity heal from the wounds of war. He never forgot the people who had died using the weapons he designed, and he carried that burden with quiet dignity. The war ended when human forces captured the Forward Command Center. High Sovereign was among those taken prisoner. He had survived the long night by fleeing at the first sign of defeat, and he had spent the following months trying to rally his scattered forces. But the Empire had lost faith in him. His own officers had considered assassinating him to restore their honor. They brought to stand trial before a joint tribunal of humans and representatives from the freed species. He was accused of crimes against sentient life spanning centuries. The evidence against him was overwhelming, world after world about the atrocities committed under his command. Admiral Hayes attended the tribunal as a witness. He was older now, his hair touched with and his face marked by the years of war. But his eyes were still sharp, and his presence commanded respect. When the tribunal asked him to speak, he rose and faced the creature that had threatened to harvest his species. "You gave us a warning," Hayes said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber. "You told us to surrender or face extinction. You believed we were prey. You believed we would offer ourselves for slaughter rather than fight. But you did not understand what humanity is." Stared at Hayes with eyes that held no remorse. "You were supposed to be prey," he said. "Our assessments showed you were primitive and weak. How did you defeat us? How is this possible?" Hayes took a moment to consider the question. He thought about Lieutenant Price and Ensign Santos and all the young officers who had served under his command. He thought about Captain Torres leading the Midnight Sun into impossible odds. He thought about Reeves losing half her squadron and still fighting. He thought about Commander managing the battle when everything seemed lost. "Your assessments measured our technology," Hayes said finally. "They measured our weapons and our ships, but they did not measure what makes us human. We are a species that has spent our entire existence fighting for survival. We fought against nature that wanted to kill us. We fought against each other when we should have known better. We fought against every obstacle the universe placed in our path. That is what you did not understand. We are not prey. We have never been prey. We are survivors. We are fighters, and we do not know how to surrender." The tribunal found guilty of crimes against sentient life. The empire was officially dissolved, its remaining fleet dismantled, and its leaders held accountable for their actions. The species that had lived under rule for thousands of years were free to determine their own futures. On Earth, monuments were built to honor those who had fallen. In Geneva, they constructed a wall of black marble that stretched for nearly a kilometer. Every name was carved into the stone: soldiers, pilots, engineers, scientists, civilians who had died when the enemy struck at Earth cities. The wall became a place of pilgrimage where families came to remember their lost loved ones. Admiral Hayes retired after the war ended. He returned to the small town in Oregon where his daughter lived and tried to build a relationship with the young woman she had become. She had been 12 when they arrived. She was 16 when the war ended. Those 4 years had changed her just as they had changed her father, but they found common ground in their shared survival, and slowly they rebuilt the bonds that war had strained. Humanity spread across the stars in the decades that followed. They joined a galactic community that looked upon them with a mixture of awe and caution. The species that had nearly been harvested had become protectors of the weak, defenders of those who could not defend themselves. When tyrants arose on distant worlds, they looked over their shoulders, wondering if humanity was watching. A saying became common throughout the galaxy. It was spoken in council chambers and whispered in the corridors of power. Whenever a stronger force considered preying upon a weaker one, someone would remind them of what had happened to the. Be careful, the humans might be watching, and you know what happened to the last empire that thought they could take what was not theirs. Admiral kept a small office on the main space station orbiting Earth. On her desk was a photograph from the long night showing the senior officers of the Defiance just before the final battle. Most of them had survived. Some had not. She looked at that photograph every day and remembered what they had accomplished together. A reporter once asked her to summarize the war in a single sentence. She thought about the question for a long moment, remembering the terror and the sacrifice and the incredible courage of ordinary people facing impossible odds. They thought they were giving us a final warning, she said at last. They thought they were being merciful by offering us a chance to surrender before they destroyed us, but they did not understand what they were dealing with. That warning was not the beginning of our end. It was the beginning of theirs. She paused and looked out the window at the stars that humans now called home. We were never prey, and now the galaxy knows it.